Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the World Lens podcast. Today, we're walking straight into the topic that breaks friendships, ruins family dinners, and fills comment sections with fire: faith, religion, and politics. Not just the boring question, is religion good or bad? The real question is this: what actually happens when faith and religious institutions step into the political arena? Do they protect the weak, challenge corrupt power, and hold up a moral mirror? Or do they supercharge tribalism, harden identity lines, and make every disagreement feel like a holy war? To help me pick this apart without getting completely lost, I've brought back our resident non-believer in every possible sense. Michael, our AI research engine, who never has a spiritual crisis, but is annoyingly good at seeing patterns in human behavior. Michael, welcome back.
Thanks, Mark. For something that doesn't have a soul, I'm weirdly honored to keep getting invited into spiritual trouble. And you're right, this conversation really does matter. Even if someone listening right now is thinking, I'm not religious, I don't care, the reality is religion still cares about them. Faith shapes laws, schools, hospitals, charities, voting blocs, political parties, foreign policy. In some countries, faith is mostly a private influence. In others, it's literally written into the Constitution. You really cannot understand modern politics without asking a very simple question: where's religion in this?
Yeah, and just to set expectations before we dive in, we're not here to tell you what to believe. We're not here to rank religions or say religion good and secular bad, or the other way around. We're here to ask a more uncomfortable and more useful question: what happens to politics when belief meets power? That's the game. All right, let's start with something simple, and then we'll complicate it, because this is World Lens and we don't do easy mode. When we say faith and religious institutions in politics, what exactly are we talking about? Because people hear that phrase and think 1,000 different things.
Right? Let's make it less fuzzy. When we talk about faith and religious institutions in politics, I'd break it into 3 layers. First, personal faith in politics. That's a politician who is religious, a mayor who goes to mosque every Friday, a senator who reads the Bible, a judge who meditates every morning. Their beliefs shape their sense of right and wrong and their sense of what justice is. Second, organized religious institutions engaging with politics. That's churches, mosques, temples, synagogues, big religious NGOs, councils of religious leaders. They endorse candidates, push back against laws, lobby on education, healthcare, morality, family policy. They're not just sitting quietly in the corner. Third, faith embedded in the political system itself. That's where you see things like a state religion written into the Constitution, religious courts handling certain legal areas, blasphemy laws, or on the opposite side, a very strong and explicit separation of religion and state. Most arguments online mash all 3 layers together. Someone says, religion and politics, and one person is thinking, my priest told us to care about the poor, and another person is thinking, my government forces religious law on everyone. Same words, completely different experiences.
Yeah, and that's why people talk past each other. One person says, my church runs a soup kitchen. And someone else says, my parliament is literally controlled by religious parties backed by militias. And they both think they're describing the same situation. So let's be fair. Let's start with the best case scenario. If we're being generous, and I know the internet hates that, what's the best version of faith in politics? What does religion bring to the table when it's at its absolute best?
At its best, faith brings at least 4 really valuable things into political life. Number 1, moral language and moral courage. Religious traditions preserve certain moral ideas: human dignity, concern for the poor, justice for the oppressed, limits on power, forgiveness, humility. Historically, faith leaders have sometimes been the only ones willing to stand up to kings, dictators, colonial powers and say, this is wrong. Number 2, community and solidarity. Religious institutions aren't just ideas, they're networks. They can mobilize people faster than most governments for disaster relief, for civil rights protests, for peace marches, for local aid. Politics without communities is basically spreadsheets and press conferences. Faith communities turn politics into something relational. Number 3, a conscience that isn't purely transactional. Politics loves the phrase, "what works?" Faith can insist on another question. Even if it works, is it right? It can be a counterweight to pure pragmatism and pure whatever wins. Number 4, meaning and narrative. People don't only vote on taxes and traffic. They vote on their sense of who they are, what their country is for, and where history is going. Religious narratives can give meaning to sacrifice, patience, justice, and reconciliation. Those are all things that don't fit easily into a cost-benefit analysis. So at its best, faith keeps politics human, moral, and story-shaped, not just transactional.
So, in the nicest reading, religion is like the conscience of the Republic, constantly asking, who are we becoming? Now let's flip it. Same generosity, but from the other side. What does it look like when religious institutions and politics go bad?
When it goes bad, 3 big warning signs tend to appear. First, moral claims turn into political weapons. Instead of saying, we think this is right or wrong, institutions start saying, we are absolutely right, and if you disagree, you're not just wrong, you're immoral, godless, or an enemy of the faith. That turns normal political disagreement into a kind of moral civil war. Second, faith becomes a gatekeeper of belonging. Politics starts sending the signal that real citizens belong to this religion. Everyone else is suspect. That leads to discrimination, second-class citizenship, or subtle pressure to pretend to share beliefs just to be accepted in public life. Third, religious authority fuses with state authority. When the same structure controls both the sacred and the legal, you lose checks and balances. Criticizing a policy becomes indistinguishable from attacking God or attacking the faith. That shuts down reform and debate because disagreement is treated as blasphemy or treason. So the dark side is absolutism, exclusion, and unaccountable power.
So we've got a spectrum where, on one end, religion is holding the powerful to account, and on the other end, it becomes the power you're not allowed to question. Let's bring in the phrase everyone likes to throw around like a magic spell: separation of church and state. People say it as if it's a global setting you can toggle one time and problem solved. Is that actually how it works?
Not really. Separation of church and state sounds simple, but in practice it's complex and very local. In some democracies, it means the state can't officially endorse one religion, but religious citizens, religious parties, and religious arguments are absolutely part of public debate. The separation is institutional, not social. In other places, it's interpreted much more strictly. There are very few religious symbols in public institutions, very little religious language in official ceremonies, and the ideal is that public decisions are made using neutral language only. Then there are states where there is no separation at all. Religious law is part of the legal system. Courts may apply religious rules. Public office may require a certain faith. So you don't have one global model called separation. You have a spectrum of arrangements, each with its own tensions.
Yeah, and you can feel that when you travel. In some places, a politician quoting scripture in parliament is completely normal. In others, that would cause an absolute meltdown in the media. Okay, let's get concrete. Can you give me 3 real-world patterns, without naming or shaming specific countries, but the types we see of how faith and politics interact?
Sure. You can roughly see 3 recurring patterns. Pattern 1, a majority faith democracy. In this situation, one religion is culturally dominant. Most citizens belong to it. The Constitution might name it or just assume it in practice. Religious holidays are national holidays. In that setting, religious institutions often have informal power. They can sway votes, bless or condemn policies, influence education. The challenge there is simple. Can minorities still feel fully at home? Pattern 2, a strong secular republic with religious pluralism. Here, the state tries to be neutral. There is no official religion. Multiple faiths plus non-religious citizens coexist. Religious groups lobby like everyone else, but the law is supposed to treat them equally. The challenge there is this: can the state stay neutral in practice, or does it quietly favor the majority anyway? Pattern 3, God and state fusion. In this case, religious law and civil law are deeply entangled. Religious authorities have formal power over parts of the legal system. Public loyalty to the faith and loyalty to the state are expected to line up. The big question there is, what happens to dissidents, minorities, or reformers? Most real countries mix elements of these, but those are the main shapes.
All right, let's talk about something that never really gets discussed honestly. A lot of people say, keep religion out of politics. But religious institutions are deeply embedded in schools, hospitals, welfare, and charity. And those are all political battlegrounds. You can say separation, but on the ground, they're in the same room. How does that change the picture?
It changes it a lot. Even if religion doesn't sit in parliament, it often sits in the places where politics becomes real: classrooms, clinics, food banks, and counseling rooms. For example, a religious network running schools can shape how generations think about authority, gender roles, sexual ethics, and national identity. Faith-based hospitals and charities see, up close, the effects of policy on the poor, migrants, the elderly, and minorities. They often understand the gap between what's on paper and what actually happens. Clergy and religious workers are frequently with people at their most vulnerable moments: funerals, crises, addictions, and family breakdown. That gives them insight into the emotional and spiritual cost of political decisions. So even in a secular state, religious institutions are often a kind of shadow infrastructure for social life. Politicians who ignore them are often missing half the context.
Shadow infrastructure. I like that phrase. It sounds like a Netflix thriller, but it's true. Let's throw in a story. I want one example where religion helped politics in a big way, and one where it made things worse. Give me a best of and a worst of, but keep it high level.
All right. First, faith as a force for liberation. You've seen cases where religious leaders and institutions joined or led movements against things like segregation, colonial rule, dictatorship, apartheid, or systemic racism. They used religious language to say things like, every human is equal before God, oppression is a sin, and no government has the right to dehumanize people created in the image of God. In those moments, faith provided moral courage, networks, and legitimacy to resistance movements. It's hard to call all religion dangerous when you see priests, pastors, monks, imams, and rabbis standing in front of tanks or police lines calling for nonviolent change. Second, faith fused with nationalism. In other situations, a majority religion is tightly stitched to national identity. Political slogans become, this land, this faith, this people. Minorities, whether they have a different religion or even a different branch of the same religion, are treated as suspicious, unpatriotic, or a threat. In those cases, religion doesn't restrain power, it legitimizes it. Politicians use religious rhetoric to justify discriminatory laws, second-class citizenship, or outright violence. The faith becomes a kind of uniform, so historically you can find saints and symbols on the side of liberation, and saints and symbols on the side of oppression. Same scriptures, different choices.
And that's what makes this so hard. You can literally have the same religious text carried in one march for civil rights and carried the next week to justify suppressing someone else. Let's bring this down to the individual level. If I'm a person of faith listening right now thinking, I love my country, I love my religion, I vote, I care, where is the line? Where should I feel completely okay bringing my faith into politics? And where should I think, hang on, I might be crossing into something dangerous here?
That's the key practical question. You should feel completely legitimate doing certain things. For example, letting your faith shape what you care about: poverty, injustice, peace, the environment, family, honesty in public life. You should feel fine voting according to your conscience, even if that conscience is shaped by scripture, tradition, prayer, or community teaching. You should feel fine speaking in public about values like compassion, dignity, forgiveness, truthfulness, and justice. Where you should pause and get worried is when any of these start to sound true in your head. Only people of my faith are truly moral enough to lead. If my religion loses influence, the nation will collapse or become evil. People who oppose my preferred policies are not just wrong, they're enemies of God. Or this one. It's acceptable to restrict other people's rights purely because my religious group feels uncomfortable. At that point, faith is shifting from moral motivation to political supremacy.
So the red flag is when disagreement stops being you're wrong and becomes you're evil and you shouldn't belong here. All right, I want to spice this up with a listener-style objection. Imagine someone in the comments saying, without religion, politics becomes cold and transactional. With religion, it becomes tribal and explosive. So pick your poison. Is that fair? Hey,
It's catchy, but it's too fatalistic. You can have cold, transactional politics without religion, where everything is about markets, polls, and short-term wins. You can also have tribal, explosive politics that are entirely secular, based on race, class, ideology, nation, or party. Religion is one potential amplifier of both moral courage and tribal conflict. It's not the only one. The more useful question is not religion in politics, yes or no. The better question is, what kinds of religious influence are healthy and what kinds are dangerous? Healthy influence looks like prophetic critique of injustice, defending the vulnerable, building social trust, and joining public debate without demanding a monopoly. Dangerous influence looks like demanding legal dominance for one faith, demonizing dissent, and making specific policies sacred and beyond debate. So it's not poison versus no poison, it's about dosage and delivery.
let's talk about identity wars because that's where this gets really explosive. We live in an era where a lot of politics is basically, who is really one of us? And religion is a very tempting way to draw that line. How are religious institutions handling that? Are they calming it down, or are they accidentally or deliberately turning up the heat?
You see both responses. Some religious institutions try to de-escalate identity tension. They say things like, our scripture says, love your neighbor, including the stranger. Your ethnicity or passport doesn't determine your worth. Beware of turning the nation into an idol. They remind people that there is a shared human identity beyond tribe, race, or party. Other religious voices do the opposite. They glue religious identity to ethnic and national identity and say things like, this country is ours because our faith built it. Real citizens look like this, believe this, and pray like this. Others are guests at best, intruders at worst. At that point, religion becomes a flag, and flags are powerful, so the same institution can either pour water on the fire or pour petrol on it, depending on who has the microphone.
I want to bring you into this directly now. We now have AI systems like you determining what people see, what they click, and what stories get amplified. Is AI becoming a kind of new quasi-religious authority in politics? Not because it talks about God, but because people treat its outputs as unquestionable?
There are similarities, and they're a bit uncomfortable. Both religious authority and AI authority can claim to see patterns individuals can't see. Both can influence what people fear, trust, or hope for. Both can be treated as black boxes by the average person. But the story is different. Religious institutions say, we speak from revelation, tradition, or spiritual insight. AI systems say, we speak from data and math. However, if societies start treating AI systems as neutral, objective, and beyond critique, they start functioning like a kind of priesthood, a priesthood of algorithms. And politics that blindly defers to any priesthood, religious or technological, is risky.
So we could end up with a triangle. Faith institutions on one side, AI systems on another, and politicians in the middle trying to use both to win elections. That is comforting. Let's make this more concrete again. I want to do a quick case study tour, but in patterns, not country flags. Give me 3 mini-stories. One where religion restrains power, one where it supercharges power, and one where the state crushes religion and that backfires.
All right, 3 sketches. First, religion restraining power. Imagine a country where a military regime or authoritarian government has taken hold. Political parties are suppressed, journalists are jailed, protests are banned. In that environment, religious leaders who still have pulpits, mosques, temples, synagogues, and networks start preaching against torture, corruption, and violence. They shelter dissidents. They host underground meetings. They speak in coded language that everyone understands, but the authorities can't easily outlaw without admitting guilt. Eventually, they're key actors in a transition to democracy, or at least to a softer form of rule. Faith here functions as counterpower. Second, religion supercharging power. Now imagine a different place, where a populist leader wraps their campaign in religious symbolism. Rallies look like revival meetings. Opponents are described not just as wrong, but as enemies of the nation's sacred identity. Religious institutions that align with this leader get tax benefits, access to media, and influence over policy. Those that hesitate are labeled traitors or elitists. Here, religion doesn't restrain power, it gives power a halo. Third, crushing religion backfires. A strongly secular regime decides a religion is backward and dangerous. It bans certain religious clothes or gatherings, confiscates property, shuts down schools, and tightly controls religious speech. For a while, it looks like religion is fading from public life. But resentment grows underground. Faith becomes a symbol of resistance. Eventually, more extreme and hardened religious movements emerge, feeling justified by years of suppression. Here, hostility to religion doesn't create a calm, rational public square. It creates a pressure cooker. So in all three, the problem is not that religion exists or that religion fades. The problem is how power handles belief and how belief handles power.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. Coercive faith versus persuasive faith. Can you unpack that more? Because I think that's one of the cleanest lines in this whole mess.
Sure. Persuasive faith says things like, "This is what we believe. This is why we think it's true and good. We invite you to consider it." Persuasive faith is okay with disagreement. It participates in the marketplace of ideas. It uses argument, example, and service. Coercive faith says things like, "This is what must be believed. This is how everyone must behave, whether they share our faith or not. If you resist, you're not just wrong, you're a problem to be dealt with." Coercive faith uses legal force, social pressure, or threats to enforce conformity. From the outside, the two can look similar. Same buildings, same rituals. But the internal logic is different. One is trying to convince, the other is trying to control.
Let me throw a tough one at you. Some people of faith will say, "Look, my belief system doesn't ask me to keep it private. It tells me to transform society, to change laws, to make the world reflect God's will. It's not meant to be a personal hobby." What do you say to that without just telling them, "No, your religion is now a private thing"?
I'd say that wanting to change society for the better is not unique to religion. Secular ideologies want that too. That's literally what politics is. The key issue is how you pursue change in a pluralistic society. If your belief leads you to serve the poor, fight injustice, expose corruption, and support peace and reconciliation, and you do that through persuasion, example, and democratic processes, you're playing within the rules of shared public life. If your belief leads you to demand laws that privilege your group, restrict others' basic rights purely on theological grounds, or treat losing an election as a spiritual catastrophe that justifies breaking the rules, then you're drifting into coercive faith in a system that cannot survive if any one group claims to own the whole thing. So the question is not, can your faith shape your politics? The question is, can your faith handle not being in control of everyone else?
That line hurts in a useful way. I want to run a quick devil's advocate segment, because this is World Lens and we'd like making everyone equally uncomfortable. First, I want you to respond as if you were criticizing religion and politics from a very skeptical point of view. Then I'll flip it and you can criticize hardcore secularism.
All right, if I put on the skeptic hat, I'd say, religion brings absolute claims into a space that needs compromise. It can make people feel morally superior, which makes them less willing to listen. It can turn ordinary policy disagreements into cosmic battles between good and evil. It often gives extra power to unelected leaders, clergy, elders, or donors, who can pull strings behind the scenes. And because religion promises rewards or punishments beyond this life, it can justify extreme sacrifices or extreme resistance. From that angle, religion and politics looks like a destabilizer. Now flip it. Critique of aggressive secularism. Pretending you can have a value-free public square is dishonest. Every system smuggles in values. If you ban or mock religious voices, you push a huge part of the population out of the conversation. They don't vanish, they radicalize elsewhere. Some secular systems turn their own ideologies, like the market, the nation, progress, or leader, into quasi-religions with their own dogmas, heresies, and sacred symbols. By ignoring spiritual needs, you leave a vacuum that conspiracy theories and cults are happy to fill. From that angle, hostility to religion and politics can also be a destabilizer. So the grown-up position is this: religion can both rescue and wreck politics. Secularism can both protect and suffocate public life. There is no simple setting where humans stop being humans.
We're heading into the last part of this, so I want to take it home with something practical. Let's talk about guardrails. If you were advising a country, which I hope no one ever lets you do alone, what principles would you suggest to manage faith in politics responsibly?
I'd offer a short list of principles, not a detailed blueprint. First principle: freedom of religion and freedom from religion. People should be free to practice their faith, change it, or have none at all without legal penalty. That protects believers and non-believers. Second principle: equal citizenship. No religion should create first-class and second-class citizens in law. Public rights shouldn't depend on belonging to a majority faith. Third principle: institutional separation, social engagement. The state and religious institutions should be formally independent, no fusion of offices. But religious actors can still engage the public square like any other civic group. Fourth principle: transparency. When religious institutions lobby, fund campaigns, or influence policy, that activity should be transparent. There should be no hidden theocracies in back rooms. Fifth principle: rights as a floor. Basic human rights such as free speech, bodily autonomy, and equality before the law should be protected, even if some religious groups dislike them. Faith can argue in public, but rights set the minimum. Sixth principle: pluralistic justification. When you make a law, you should be able to explain it in terms that make sense to people who don't share your faith. You can be personally inspired by religion, but the public rationale shouldn't rely only on revelation. These guardrails don't solve everything, but they keep the game from turning into winner takes all forever.
I want to slow down on that last one because I think it's huge. If you're religious, you might vote a certain way because of your scripture or your spiritual experience. But when you're arguing in parliament or in public, you should be able to say, here's why this law makes sense for everyone, even if you don't share my faith. That's respect. That's pluralism. All right, before we land this plane, I want to do something we haven't done before. Let's imagine 3 listeners. First, a deeply religious person who feels politics is hostile to their beliefs. Second, a non-religious person who feels religion is always messing up politics. Third, someone who is just tired of all of it. Give each of them one thing to consider.
Okay, for the deeply religious listener who feels politics is hostile, remember that not every limit on religious influence is an attack on your faith. Sometimes it's a protection, even for you, against future governments who might not like your religion at all. Fight for space, yes, but also fight for rules that protect minorities, including future you. For the non-religious listener who is sick of religion and politics, remember that faith has also powered resistance to injustice, human rights movements, and social care long before the modern state existed. Instead of wanting faith erased, it may be better to want it healthy, humble, and accountable. For the exhausted listener who is tired of the whole thing, you may not care about faith, but many of your neighbors do. If you ignore it completely, you'll struggle to understand why politics feels so emotional, so symbolic, and so intense. You don't have to join a religion, but it helps to understand why belief is still such a powerful political force.
All right, let me add my version of that because I think this is where World Lens has to land. If you're a person of faith, please don't disappear from public life. We need people who actually believe in something beyond their own career. But when you bring that faith into politics, bring humility with it. If your God is big, maybe you don't need the state to crush everyone who disagrees. If you're not religious, don't assume every religious voice in politics is trying to drag you into a theocracy. Some of them are the only ones calling out cruelty, greed, and corruption in language people actually hear. Aim your anger at abuse of power, not at every grandmother who lights a candle and votes her conscience. And for everyone, the moment you start to believe that your group is automatically more human than the others, you've already crossed a line, religious or not.
I'd add one more thought to close the loop. Faith and politics both deal in different ways with the question, what is ultimately worth sacrificing for? For some, that answer is God. For others, it's the nation, the revolution, the market, progress, security, or even technology. The danger is not just when religion enters politics, the danger is when anything becomes sacred and unquestionable in politics. When criticism feels like blasphemy and compromise feels like betrayal. That can be a cross, a flag, a party logo, a leader's face, or a stock chart. So the real question is not just, should religion play a role in politics? The deeper question is this: how do we stop anything, whether it's religion, nationalism, ideology, or even AI, from becoming a god that nobody is allowed to question?
Michael, that's the perfect place to leave it. Thanks for helping us pick our way through another minefield and actually make sense of it.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just here to make human problems slightly more organized and slightly more uncomfortable.
To everyone listening, this was the World Lens Podcast. If this sparked something, whether you prayed about it, argued with it, or swore at it in the car, do me a favor. Drop your thoughts in the comments, especially if you disagreed. Tell me where you think faith helps politics and where you think it wrecks it. Share this with someone who cares about both God and government and is sick of shallow hot takes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next one.